Throughout the long, grinding campaign across northwest Europe from June 1944 to May 1945, American intelligence officers interrogated thousands of captured German soldiers. The reports they produced, carefully preserved today in the National Archives, revealed something unexpected, something astonishing, and something that would become one of the least known but most important truths of World War II. When German soldiers were asked which American weapon they feared most, the answer was almost unanimous. It was not American tanks, not American aircraft, and not the fearsome fighter bombers that prowled the skies. It was artillery. American artillery. Time and time again, German prisoners described it as the single most terrifying force on the battlefield, an invisible hammer that struck without warning, without mercy, and with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. This fear didn't just appear in their words, it shaped German tactics at every level. Units moved almost exclusively at night, dispersing their formations to avoid being caught in the open. Commanders limited their own artillery activity to the smallest, quickest bursts, terrified that if they fired too long, American guns would lock onto them within minutes. German soldiers learned to recognize the distinct sound of the American Piper L-4 Cub aircraft, the tiny, high-pitched liaison plane that floated quietly above the front lines. Whenever that sound drifted across the sky, panic followed. Men froze, went silent, and dove for cover because they knew exactly what was coming next. They had 3 minutes, sometimes less, before American artillery shells would begin crashing onto their positions with mathematical precision. And the Germans were right to fear it. American artillery was not simply a weapon, it was a system, an interconnected, meticulously engineered machine built during decades of doctrinal development, training, and innovation. The guns themselves were not superior. In fact, German 105mm and 150mm artillery often outranged their American counterparts. What made the American artillery unmatched was how it worked together. Forward observers, aerial scouts, fire direction centers, meteorological teams, survey units, radios, maps, and planning procedures all fused into one seamless process. German prisoners repeatedly described American artillery fire that arrived without ranging shots, without hesitation, and without any chance for them to escape. One Wehrmacht soldier captured near St. Lo in July 1944 said fighting Americans felt like fighting an enemy who could see everything, hear everything, and shoot at everything simultaneously. He explained that whenever an L-4 Cub appeared overhead, German units started timing the response. Again and again, the first American shells landed just over 3 minutes later, so consistent that German officers literally carried stopwatches to predict their own doom. That speed stunned German artillery officers. They knew how long calculations should take. In the German system, a battery receiving firing coordinates required at least 12 to 15 minutes to compute elevation, deflection, and charge settings. 20 minutes or more was common under combat conditions. Yet the Americans delivered massed fires in 1/6 of that time. What the Germans didn't fully understand was that this incredible responsiveness came from a quiet revolution that had begun years earlier at the U.S. Army Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. There, during the interwar years, officers like Major Carlos Brewer and Major Orlando Ward analyzed the failures of World War I artillery doctrine. They noticed that guns in the Great War were effective individually but inefficient collectively. The problem wasn't equipment. It was coordination. Fire missions were slow, calculations too complex, and massing fire from multiple batteries required hours of planning. Brewer introduced standardized firing charts, precise survey procedures, and improved communication methods. Ward went further and changed military history. He created the Fire Direction Center, a centralized brain that received target information from observers and instantly computed firing data for every gun in the battalion. Instead of 3 or 4 officers in different batteries doing math separately, One trained team could compute everything, synchronize it, and push the results to every gun in seconds. But the final piece of the puzzle, the breakthrough that made 3-minute response times possible, came in 1940. Captain Abbott H. Burns, frustrated with slow and complex manual calculations, pulled an all-nighter that would transform modern warfare. By morning, he had created the graphical firing table, a transparent slide rule that allowed fire direction teams to compute firing solutions 20 times faster than before. Now even enlisted soldiers with basic math skills could perform calculations once reserved for highly trained officers. With centralized control from the Fire Direction Center and lightning-fast computation from the graphical firing table, American artillery stopped being a collection of guns. It became a single weapon with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of barrels working in perfect synchronization. This innovation unlocked an even more devastating technique, the time-on-target mission. Instead of shells arriving sporadically, American guns across miles of battlefield fired at carefully calculated moments so that every shell arrived within a 3-second window. The result was catastrophic for German troops. In a normal bombardment, the first incoming shells gave soldiers time to drop into cover. In a time-on-target strike, everything landed at once. No warning, no escape, no chance to react. German units were literally erased before they knew they were under fire. But precision calculations alone weren't enough. American artillery needed eyes, and no other army in the world had eyes as effective as those provided by the Piper L-4 Cub. At just 85 miles per hour, made of fabric and aluminum, the tiny Cub became one of the most feared aircraft of the war, not because it dropped bombs, but because it led artillery fire with godlike vision. From just a few hundred feet in the air, a trained artillery observer could see miles of terrain, hidden supply depots, camouflaged guns, vehicle columns, assembly areas, and infantry formations tucked inside hedgerows. The L-4 Cub saw everything the Germans thought was concealed. Every artillery battalion received 2 of these aircraft, and more than 2,700 served in Europe alone. German commanders eventually issued explicit orders: if you hear a Cub, freeze, because if it sees you, you will be hit. Attempts to shoot down Cubs often failed. They flew too low, too slow, and too unpredictably for anti-aircraft guns calibrated to hit fast-moving fighters. German planes could catch the Cub easily, but flying near the front lines was deadly for German aircraft thanks to American air superiority. Many Cub pilots served their entire tours without being shot down despite flying almost daily over enemy positions. These pilots developed tight relationships with fire direction centers. Together, they formed a hyper-efficient team capable of identifying a target, transmitting coordinates, calculating firing data, and hitting the enemy, often within 2 minutes. The psychological effect on the Germans was profound. They could no longer move during daylight. They could not mass forces for a counterattack. They could not reposition artillery batteries without risking detection. Even rear area units, supposedly safe behind the lines, felt exposed. If the Cubs saw them, death followed. The system reached its terrifying peak in major battles throughout France, Belgium, and Germany. At Mortain in August 1944, German forces attempted a massive counterattack to cut off American units. The attack began well under the cover of darkness, but as dawn broke, L-4 Cubs lifted into the sky. Within minutes, American artillery shredded German armor columns trying to push toward Avranches. Some American batteries fired more than 1,000 rounds in a single day. One gun crew shot so much ammunition that their howitzer's barrel glowed red-hot and had to be cooled with water. German tank commanders later reported that every attempt to maneuver resulted in near-instant artillery strikes. Their tanks weren't being hunted, they were being watched. The same pattern emerged at Hill 192, outside St. Lo. After weeks of attempts to take the heavily fortified German position, American forces unleashed a devastating artillery plan built around time-on-target missions and continuous night bombardment. More than 20,000 shells fell in a single day, smashing communication lines, neutralizing bunkers, and disorienting defenders. When American infantry advanced, they met little organized resistance. German survivors later said the artillery, not the infantry, had broken them. During the Battle of the Bulge, American artillery reached its absolute zenith. On the northern shoulder near Elsenborn Ridge, fire direction centers coordinated an unimaginable 348 guns, divisional, corps, and attached artillery, firing together as one. German assaults simply dissolved under the bombardment. Tanks were immobilized, infantry scattered, and officers killed before they could coordinate attacks. German official histories later concluded that American artillery, more than any other factor, halted the northern drive of the Ardennes offensive. In the besieged town of Bastogne, surrounded by German forces, American artillery remained the backbone of the defense. Forward observers embedded with the 101st Airborne continuously called for fire, and FDCs synchronized support from guns both inside and outside the pocket. German attackers rarely got close because artillery hit them long before they could form for an assault. Even when German artillery attempted to answer back, American counterbattery operations shut them down quickly. Flash spotting teams, sound-ranging microphones, aerial observers, and radio intercepts pinpointed German guns within moments. Any battery that fired more than a handful of rounds could expect counterfire within minutes. German artillery became so restricted that many batteries fired only a small fraction of their authorized ammunition each day. As if American artillery wasn't already deadly enough, December 1944 brought the arrival of the proximity fuse, a technological miracle so advanced that its developers feared it would alter the course of the war if captured by the enemy. Instead of detonating on impact, these shells exploded at precisely the right height above the ground, showering trenches and foxholes with lethal fragments. A shell that once killed 2 or 3 soldiers could now kill 20 or 30. The effect on German morale was catastrophic. Soldiers who had survived countless bombardments by digging deep positions suddenly found that their best defense no longer protected them. Some refused to seek cover at all, believing fatalistically that nothing they did mattered anymore. But the story of American artillery superiority is not about a single invention, a single moment, or a single leader. It is a story of a system, an institution built slowly, carefully, and intelligently over decades. It required accurate maps, reliable radios, meteorological teams, survey crews, standardized firing tables, forward observers, aircraft, and above all, extraordinary training. Every piece mattered. Remove even one element, and the system weakened. But with all elements working together, American artillery became the most responsive, flexible, and deadly fire support system the world had ever seen. German officers understood this better than anyone. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel noted repeatedly that Allied artillery, especially American artillery, was the decisive battlefield factor in Normandy. Field Marshal von Manstein later commented that American trucks given to the Soviets through Lend-Lease dramatically increased Soviet artillery mobility, allowing them to outmaneuver German guns. Even the enemy recognized that American logistics, doctrine, and mobility, not just technology, won the artillery war. The men who created this system, Brewer, Ward, Burns, did not become household names. They weren't credited in popular history books, didn't appear on magazine covers, and received no statues or monuments. But their work saved thousands of American lives and contributed directly to the collapse of German military capability in Western Europe. Their doctrine became the backbone of NATO artillery, shaping fire support systems used today in conflicts around the world. Digital computers and GPS have replaced their charts and slide rules, but the principles they developed, centralized control, rapid calculation, flexible massing of fires, and precision delivery remain unchanged. When the war ended on May 8, 1945, American artillery fired its final missions against scattered German resistance. Forward observers packed their radios. Fire direction centers shut down their plotting boards. The system that had dominated the battlefields of Europe went silent, but its legacy never faded. Modern armies still use the same basic structure developed at Fort Sill. Artillery is still the most lethal weapon on the battlefield. And the lessons learned in those years still shape military thinking today. German soldiers in World War II could dig deeper, hide better, or move faster. But when the Piper Cub appeared overhead, they knew the truth. American artillery was coming. It would strike with precision, coordination, and terrifying speed. There would be no warning, no escape. Only the deadly efficiency of a system perfected long before the first shot was fired. In the end, American artillery proved something profound. Wars are not won only by bravery or by superior weapons, but by systems, carefully designed, rigorously trained, and flawlessly executed. The artillerymen of World War II were not just firing shells. They were operating one of the most complex and effective machines ever created for war. A machine that broke the Wehrmacht's ability to fight, shattered German morale, and helped bring an end to the deadliest conflict in human history.